Hello and welcome to the Kings Weekly podcast, part of the Basketball Intelligence Podcast Network, the Believe Network, and the Old Man Squad Network. I am your co-host, Nick Agar Johnson, editor-in-chief and staff writer for No Ceilings NBA. And in addition to our very special guest today, I am joined as always by my co-host, the founder and curator of the Basketball Intelligence newsletter, available at basketballintelligence.net, Ray LeBeau. Hello there, Ray.
Hello, Nick, and hello, everyone. And let me introduce our special guest. Our special guest is Joe Freeman, senior writer covering the Blazers for OregonLive. Thanks for joining us today, Joe.
Happy to be here. Nice to talk to you guys. How you guys doing today?
We're doing a lot better than the local team is doing.
See, I was going to make that joke, and then Ray stole it from me, so that's fine.
Oh, you're welcome to it.
Yeah.
Joe, we know that starting tomorrow, there's a 2-game set between the Blazers and the Kings, and that's why we wanted to have you on to preview that set. I'd like to start out by having you tell our listeners, what's the state of the Blazers at the moment?
Oh man, such a simple question. a deep answer. It's really been difficult to assess this team this season because it's just been absolutely devastated by injuries. It's a team that entered the year with a lot of promise and a lot of positivity. After years of rebuilding, it was finally the Blazers were finally ready to start chasing wins instead of lottery ping pong balls. And they opened the season with, a very strong, is there a strong loss? They had a promising debut in which, an Anthony Edwards flurry down the fourth quarter ruined a season-opening win. Otherwise, they would have, had a surprising win. And then hours later, everyone woke up to the unprecedented news that Coach Chauncey Billups had been arrested by federal agents at his home in a Portland suburb. And so that's how the season started. So this team has kind of been, embroiled in a little bit of controversy from day 2, if you will. But that unprecedented event did not drain their early season mojo. In fact, they had a very promising start to the season. They beat Oklahoma City in the first 2 weeks. They beat Golden State. They had another good win that I'm spacing on right now, Denver. And so, they were 5-3 with 3 really good wins, and they seemed to be everything that you thought they could potentially be. They were playing this very fast-paced style of basketball with relentless defensive pressure, 94 feet in some cases. They were running 10, sometimes 11 guys deep, kind of using this, almost like hockey line changes. They were playing so many guys, and it was kind of born out of Chauncey Billups had wanted to bring in this philosophy to kind of match their personnel. They're not very good in half-court sets. They don't have very good shooting, so just kind of wanted to overwhelm teams with depth and athleticism and youth and kind of chaos. And it worked really well, or was working really well for interim coach Tiago Splitter, who kind of came over from France to help institute this system. It was something that he ran for the Paris basketball club in France. And then guys just started dropping one by one by one. And here we are, 2 months later, and 10 different Blazers players have missed a combined 133 games this season. They've played without a true point guard for, at least the last 3-4 weeks. Denny Avdia, who's having an incredible season, is a forward, trapped in a point guard trapped in a forward's body. There we go. He's kind of been their primary ball handler, and he's certainly not a natural ball handler. Recently, they had to play multiple games without all 3 point guards and all 3 traditional centers. So, it's hard to do that, and we've seen the results. They won their previous game at home against Golden State, but before that, they had lost 11 of their previous 14 games. They just haven't had the depth. They haven't had the level of talent that they thought they would going into the season. They've had to rely on multiple two-way players, multiple into the bench guys to kind of keep things afloat. And so here we are, where are we at? We're at mid-December, and they're not exactly where they want to be. Obviously, their depth and everything has just been drained, and their positive mojo's kind of been sapped. And they're 10-16. So
here's a statistic that will help show just how bad that injury situation is. When the Kings made the playoffs 3 years ago, they set what seems to be a record, although I haven't verified it exactly. They missed 65 games for the entire season.
Wow.
And now even if you deduct Lillard, the Blazers have missed significantly more games through player games through injury through 27 games than the Kings missed in the entire season. Mm-hmm. So just to get some idea that Kings fans could relate to.
My quick math may be wrong here, but I think even if you exclude both Lillard and Scoot Henderson from that count, Portland has still missed more games this season than the Kings missed in their 3-seed year.
Wow. Yeah. And that's the thing, with the injuries is it started before day one for this team. Scoot went down, I think it was 3 days before the start of training camp. And he hasn't played a second this season. And so, they were expecting him to kind of, finally emerge and sort of start to fulfill his talent. Yeah. Especially with leadership around him, like Dame from behind the scenes. And then certainly with Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday played the first 12 games and the Blazers were 6-6. So, that's reflective of where this team, could be, if not better at this point. There was a lot of uncertainty about the team. There was hope. But there's still, like I said, there's not a lot of great shooting on the team. They're not good in offensive sets. They just have a lot of really good young players and a lot of athleticism and length. And they kind of just wanted to use that as their calling card and defense. They were I think the fourth best defensive team over the second half of last season. They returned the bulk of their best defenders, and some of those best defenders got older and more experienced. And so they were banking on that being their calling card. Well, as of yesterday, and I assume it's still, I haven't checked this morning, but they're the 22nd ranked defensive team in the NBA. So, what are you going to do when you don't have a lot of your best players? I will say, to their credit, they haven't suffered a ton of really bad blowout losses. They've lost a couple stinkers, and they dropped a brutal game at New Orleans last week when they didn't have 3-point guards and all of their traditional centers. But otherwise, they've remained competitive, and that's one thing Tiago Splitter kind of promised from his very first introductory press conference was this team is going to compete. This team is going to play hard, and for the most part, they have done that. And that hasn't always been the case as they've kind of been tanking over the last few years to get to this point. I don't think that's a lot of consolation for fans as someone who, this is my first year back on the beat. I covered it for about 13 or 14 years beforehand. I think that's the bare minimum you should expect out of NBA players. But as we all know, that doesn't always happen. So to their credit, despite all of their adversity and everything, they still, they're still playing hard, and they're still really in most of these games. They've played 16, I want to say it's 16 clutch time games this season, which is, the NBA defines as a score within 5 points in the final 5 minutes. I want to say it's the fourth or fifth most of any team in the league this season, and that's despite being shorthanded in so many of these games. So they really are fighting for their lives. They just, at this point, they're duress of talent at this.
I think that obviously the loss of everybody hurts a lot, but I think as you were sort of alluding to, the loss of Holiday. In so many of the ways that you were just talking about, organizing them, still a really good defender, although not what he was, but still a really good defender, the clutch issues, all of those things you're talking about, I think just magnifies or should magnify in terms of attention of just how significant not having him is beyond what on the surface you might think.
No question. And, this was a team that didn't have a lot of leadership before as they were rebuilding. And he was brought in to be that guy while still producing, high quality minutes. And he did that over the first 12 games. And I think that is the biggest thing that this team has lost in his absence, someone who can create in the half court and run a half court, set. And just in crunch time, on both sides of the court, he was the one guy that can kind of guide the ship, when it mattered most. And Denny is certainly capable of doing that. But what we've seen, especially over the last couple of weeks, is teams are starting to blitz him. They're starting to double him because there's just not as much offense around him, as I mentioned multiple times, especially in the half court set. So his absence has been certainly felt deeply by this team. He was as all the the Chauncey stuff and everything was going on around. He was one of the certainly one of the leaders who kind of just steadied things and calmed things down. He's seen it all. He's a 2-time NBA champion and all defensive player, and he stuck it to the Blazers a few years ago with Dame and CJ when he was with New Orleans in the playoffs. So we've all seen firsthand what he's capable of doing, and Blazers fans got an up close look at it for the first 12 games. I do think he's inching closer to a return. The Blazers have been very coy about that return, and has refused to answer questions from media, during his absence. I think him and Matisse Thybulle are inching closer to coming back. And if those two guys, I think there's a chance, and I this is gut feeling based upon what I've seen and heard a little bit. There's a chance Drew could come back in one of these two games against the Kings. I certainly wouldn't lock it, but I think there's a decent chance. And then Matisse is getting closer too. So you bring those two guys back, that's two of your better defenders. And just two of your spark plugs and smarter players as well. And so that will help immeasurably.
Well, we want to get into asking you about Coach Splitter and his approach and how it differs and what he's trying to accomplish and all those sorts of things and what you've seen happen. Before that, I just want to mention, we talked earlier about the number of games missed. That year that the Kings had a total of 65 for the season. Here's a number for the Blazers not to shoot for. The Grizzlies led the league with 579.
Whew. That's a lot.
Yeah. Hard to top. But on the Splitter topic, there's one thing that I'm curious about in terms of how much you think this is a Splitter philosophy and how much of this you think is just sort of adjustment based on the plethora of injuries that Portland has suffered this season. But last year, they were almost exactly middle of the pack in terms of pace. They were 16th in pace. So far this year, they're second out of 30 teams in terms of pace. And, you mentioned how the defense to close the season was one of the strongest in the league. And that, I think, was what stood out, as an outsider, the most about Portland's season last year was, it was two things for me. It was, first of all, they had literally one player who got minutes over the age of 30, and that player was 30 in Jeremy Green last season. And obviously with Drew Holiday aboard, that's different this year. But it does stand out to me that even though the defense is clearly not what the team would have hoped for, that the offense, both in terms of efficiency and in terms of just how fast they're moving, is dramatically different from last season. So how much of that do you think is just how Tiago Splitter wants to run the offense? And how much of that do you think is just them adjusting to the fact that they've been heavily injured, particularly at point guard and center, as you mentioned?
Well, that was what going into the year they wanted to do. They wanted to be that style of team because they just don't have that half court offense. And so they wanted to be disruptive on defense. They wanted to pressure teams full court, which when you look back to some of their wins earlier in the year over Denver and OKC, they employed that effectively. They quite literally, with Toumani Camara, who was a second team all the NBA defensive guy last year, and Matisse Thybulle, a noted pest on defense. Donovan Clingan is a second year center who's a really good, last line of defense kind of guy. And then some lower key guys that you probably have never heard of, or certainly the casual NBA fan hasn't heard of, guys like Blake Wesley, who was just an absolute pest on defense. And so you get Toumani and Blake guarding literally the moment point guard touches the ball, by the time they get into their half court set, it's the clock's running down and so on and so forth, if they just haven't just collected a steal and had a fast break point. So that was all part of what the Blazers wanted to do, what they wanted their identity to be. Their DNA was kind of, mapped out around their defense and their pace and athleticism. And so this was all by design. And Chauncey brought in a few different assistant coaches, including Patrick St. Andrews and Tiago Splitter, to institute and instill that offense. And so that's something they worked at over the summer as a coaching staff, and then in off-season workouts, volunteer workouts, to kind of do that, to build that identity. And so in training camp, that was all you heard about the team, is they're going to play fast, they're going to play loose, and they're going to be disruptive. And so that was all by design. It's probably a good time to mention that Doug Christie went out to visit Tiago Splitter in the offseason. Tiago Splitter was a relatively hot commodity by NBA teams. He coached at Brooklyn for many years, and then went to Houston and coached 1 year under Ime Udoka. And, he kind of had designs that he wanted to be a head coach one day. And so he got a call from David Kahn, former Minnesota Timberwolves general manager, and a variety of other roles in the NBA, who is co-owner and CEO of the Paris Basketball Club. I always mispronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try, but the Memphis Grizzlies head coach, they had plucked him, and now he's their head coach. They had taken him from Paris, and Paris, David Kahn was looking to replace him, and was just overwhelmed and impressed by Tiago Splitter, and ended up hiring him. And so he kind of went over. But one interesting thing on this subject of playing fast and all that, it was not David Kahn's system in Paris until he got there. That was one of the things that David Kahn talked to Tiago about, was, look, we really love you as a coach, but we love our system, and it fits our personnel and identity, and we've had a lot of success with it. So if you're willing to come over and kind of take over our system and tweak it to suit you and what you are as a coach, but keep running this style, we want you to be our coach. And he was like, yeah, that's not a problem. So he came over, kind of fine-tuned that system, learned some of its intricacies, and he had, he's an experienced NBA champion, so he's no stranger to different kinds of systems. But through the course of that, he had a EuroLeague success in EuroLeague. He led him to a Paris League championship, and so he had a lot of success. Furthered that success. Their point guard was the MVP of that league overseas, and so he kind of became a hot commodity. And I know Doug Christie talked to him in the preseason when the Kings played in Portland, and he talked about going over and visiting Tiago as well and talking about their system. And ultimately, Tiago came over with the Blazers. So I got on a tangent there, but I thought it was noteworthy to mention that Doug had his fingerprints on Tiago at some point as well.
It's really difficult, I think, for the Kings to even have a system, given the personnel that they have. They have, a clunky offense that has players who their most talented offensive players all are ball dominant, and none of them can play defense. And so how do you have it? What's the system that you have? And to the extent that you have a non-system that results in that detracts from Keegan Murray being able to do the things that he does best. I mean, he's still obviously a really good rebounder and a good defender, but his offense suffers by virtue of the fact that he's playing with players that he doesn't fit with, and that's not his fault. And in a sense, it's not even really their fault. They are who they are.
So before we get into matchup stuff, and I know we're running low on time, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, but I have one exceptionally biased question that Ray has graciously allowed me to ask. I was a huge fan of CD Sissoko in his draft class. And, for all the struggles that the Blazers have had with injuries this year, he's certainly been a beneficiary in terms of playing time. So what are your thoughts on the season CD Sissoko's put forth so far? And do you think there's a chance that his two-way deal gets converted because he's quickly burning through games on the main Portland roster?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, no one envisioned him playing this much, certainly. I mean, he started several games, which no one could had on their bingo card, in October. He's been very good as far as he's a solid defender. He's a good glue guy. His shooting is streaky, that's kind of held him back a little bit. He's obviously young and inexperienced, and so that's, he's learning on the fly and being a thrust into a more prominent role. But he's very well liked in the locker room. He's one of the more popular guys. He's a very good vibes guy around the team, and so I know they like him. I don't know as far as him converting his contract. I can't say for sure at this point.
Sure.
Inevitably, guys will come back, you would assume, and the team will regain its health. Like I said, Drew and Matisse are inching closer to returning. Drew kind of has a calf situation that he's been battling for weeks, and Matisse tore a ligament or something in his thumb, and so he's been out since I want to say Halloween or right around Halloween. Might have been right just before Halloween, but so he's getting closer. And so as these guys start to get back, you'd assume that would, relegate some of these guys who have seen so much unexpected playing time back to the bench. But we'll have to see. What is the game threshold on that? I don't even know off the top of my head.
I believe it's
50, isn't it?
50. Yeah.
50? Yeah. So we'll see. It seems unlikely. And the Blazers are capped out with their roster limit anyway, so they have all 15 guys and then their 3 two-ways, so I don't even know how that would work. But I like CD. He's a really good kid, and I think he could be a multi-year pro for sure. He just definitely has to expand his game, and I'd like to see him improve his shooting. But he brings a lot of things that you are enticed by to the table.
Yeah, I mean the defense and the playmaking vision. You mentioned the glue guy thing, and that was what drew me to him as a prospect. So it's good to hear that he's continuing those sorts of things. But we're running down on time. But just quickly before we wrap up, wanted to run through some of the key matchups. And as you mentioned, if Drew Holiday returns, obviously he will be a huge piece of the puzzle here. But beyond the sort of fraternal connection between Keegan Murray and Chris Murray, the matchup I think I'm most interested in is Keegan Murray versus Toumani Camara, two young forwards who have turned into exceptional defensive talents. I mean, you mentioned Toumani making the all second team all defense last year. Certainly Keegan is someone who may well be in line for defensive team nominations across his career. And there's also the fact that Keegan is back, which, for all the woes that the Kings have suffered this season, their defense looks 10 times worse without Keegan Murray in the building. So I'm curious for your thoughts on the key matchups, but certainly Camara Murray is one that I'm going to be watching very closely.
Yeah, that's all. Anytime Toumani, he typically guards the best player on the other team, regardless of position, minus a center or something like that. So that's a good one to highlight. He's Toumani is very much in a lot of ways the heart and soul of the Blazers, just because of how hard he plays on defense. And he's had a little bit of an up and a streaky shooting season. I think that he would say he's been disappointed with his shooting this year. He's kind of the prototypical 3-and-D guy, and the Blazers rely on that so heavily. But as far as his defense and this team's DNA, he factors into that heavily. So much so, Splitter just introduced this new thing last game. It's kind of a it's a little rah-rah thing, but it's a fun little side story. After the Blazers' last win over the Warriors, in the post-game locker room, he pulled out this shipping box, a FedEx box in the middle of them. He was like, "What the hell's going on here?" Lifts out of the box a wooden box with a slot, almost like a 1960s. You're voting, you're going to voting day on Election Tuesday, and he introduced a new tradition in which each game the coaching staff will name a defender of the game, the player who plays the best defense, whatever, and then that player will go write his name on a piece of paper and fold and drop it in the box. And then at the end of the year, the person with the most nominations will receive some type of to be determined prize. So it's kind of a way to, a fun little thing to inspire a team that's struggling on defense to dedicate itself and energize itself. Well, Tiago batted around a bunch of different ideas, and he came up with a box because it's one of Camara's kind of signature defensive things, almost like it was inspired by NFL cornerbacks who kind of, when they lock someone up, they go, you're in a box, and they kind of mimic draw an invisible box with their fingers. When Toumani was a rookie, he did that during a game against Darius Garland. He kind of shut him down in Cleveland, and he just instinctively did that. And it's kind of been something he's done over the course of his career. And so that just kind of goes to show how important, Toumani is to this team and to their DNA. And, he was signed to an offseason deal, extension right before the deadline this year. So is Shaedon Sharpe. So it's those are a couple of guys that they've invested in, younger guys that they want to be a fabric of the organization for a while. But between the style of play and the defensive disruption that this team wants to bring, Toumani, any matchup with Toumani is one that I would good job highlighting that one, I guess I would say.
Well,
appreciate it. I remember.
I wanted to follow up on one thing that you just said, if you have a minute.
Yeah.
And that is about Shaedon Sharpe and how he's been playing and what you now expect from him as opposed to what the expectations were coming into this season, and how's that development going, et cetera. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, he's a guy who missed some time. And even before he missed some time, he was playing a little hobbled. He had a calf thing, but it feels like a third of every team in the NBA has some kind of calf injury. But he was dealing with calf strain, and so he was hobbled, and then he returned after, I want to say, 4 or 5 games gone, and then was on a minutes restriction. He's only been, loosened from that restriction over the last few games. I wouldn't say 3 or 4, so he's kind of back. He just started his second game, or returned to the starting lineup for his second game against the Warriors. He's been very, kind of like his career, very streaky, very up and down. He's not shooting very well from 3-point range. He was quite literally the worst in the NBA for a little bit there. I'm not sure if he still is, but he was there. He's a highlight waiting to happen anytime he touches the ball, but he's also a turnover waiting to happen anytime he touches the ball. And many of his turnovers are kind of head scratching, inexplicable, just fumbling away at half court or in on the perimeter that directly leads to a basket for the other team. So he has so much talent, and there's so much inside there. You just are waiting to see it on a consistent basis. He has just some incredible games that leaves you awe-inspired, and then he has some games that just leave you shaking your head. And so I think we're still waiting for him to put it all together. It'll be interesting to see if, now that he's healthy, and he said after the last game, I want to say he scored 35 points off the top of my head. And so, nights like that, he's very capable of doing that on a consistent basis. It does take a lot of shots, though, and he's not bashful about shooting. So it comes with some, you have to give the old give and take sort of a situation. But, he's still very young. He's still very much improving on defense and improving in all areas. So jury's still out on that one, but they did lock him down for 4 years before the season. So they do have a lot of their young nucleus wrapped up here for the foreseeable future. So if they can just get healthy, I think we can see a little bit more about what this team legitimately is. Another thing to I guess Shaedon's credit is he has been forced to take on a lot more ball handling responsibilities since they haven't had a true point guard for 3-4 weeks or whatever it's been. So, that could lead to some of those turnovers as well. But, I know that there's more in there, and I'd like to see more from him.
Well, as you were describing him, I was in my mind's eye thinking of Russell Westbrook when you're talking about the athletic ability and the turnovers and the shot selection. And, Chick Hearn used to talk about players who were shoot you in, shoot you out players. And it strikes me that obviously he's not ever played at the level that Russell Westbrook has played at, who has, right? But the description brought to mind, and I was like, wow, you could be describing Russell Westbrook.
Yeah. Gilbert Arenas.
Yeah.
There we go. So, Joe, we're already over on time, so thank you so much for all the time you've given us today. Is there anything you want to plug before we wrap this one up?
I don't think so. I think we're good. Looking forward to seeing these two teams play here. We got a little back-to-back, little holiday back-to-back here. So get 2 of the 4 out of the way in 3 or 4 days.
There we go.
Thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your no doubt crazy schedule. So much appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to talk to you guys. Good talking to you, and good luck the rest of the way. We'll talk to you again later.
Great. Thank you.
All right, that was Joe Freeman of the Oregonian and OregonLive. You can find his work at those publications. You can find us, as mentioned previously, we are part of the Basketball Intelligence Network, the Believe Network, BLEAV, for those of you who aren't aware, and the Old Man Squad Network. If you've been enjoying the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave a rating and/or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Always much appreciated on our end. And if you have any feedback on the show, feel free to reach out to us either via our social media, Kings Weekly Pod on Twitter, Kings Weekly Podcast on Blue Sky, or email kingsweeklypodcast@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.